unable to work now, and classified as disabled, they're getting an extra 2 years from 65 until 67, to get that higher payment. Right? Now, unless they do this every couple of years, right? Then, these people are going to have to, keep, keep upping the disability years, because they're not going to get Social Security. I mean, their Social Security benefits aren't going to be enough. To sustain them. You had to be working a full-time job for 30 years. To get enough payment in there to even, be close to being able to, sustain, a retirement. So now, whoever you are out there who is like on disability and, and so happy with your lifestyle because, you can work up to nine months, at full-time pay, you're the ones that are out here having to invest. You're going to have to invest heavily, with half of your money. Because 2 years down the line, the question is going to come up again, are you going to be ready to be converted over into retirement and get off of disability? And it's going to be harder every single year that you wait to get off of disability, and every year that you get older, especially after the age of 50. Under the age of 50, you might be considered on an application, right? Meaning, if you graduated in 1990 and beyond, then they know that you're probably 50 or younger. They don't even have to know your birthday. They'll just base it off of your year of graduation. And interesting enough, the way we have analytics nowadays, they may give you, reductions in points, right? For every year you graduated college after the age of 24. We don't really have any statistics on that yet. But we do know that they do give people under the age of 26 just graduating college you know, priority consideration to enter the job force. But you have to remember what I said. You had to be under the age of 26, just graduating, new graduate, or going to graduate. And they have it on application questionnaires. Now, this may not be something that, you know, is known by the government, that this is what's going on, but this is what's going on. This is why, you know, they're not discriminating, you know, until they even, you know, make you a consideration, I guess, right? It's not a discrimination if they say, well, no, you don't qualify. Exercise ball way down here in the park. So I don't know. You know, you have some people, you know, who are out here working two full-time jobs. You know, they don't care if they have to get doped up to work them. And technically, you know, the way that they had the warehouse jobs, right? They had the warehouse jobs where you could possibly work, you know, 2 jobs, right? If you go, you know, work at, you know, say you're working at Amazon, right? And you're working 4 days on and 3 days off, right? Then you have 3 days in which you can go out and do gig work if you have the energy. Now, most old people, they're not going to have the energy to do that unless they're doing something that doesn't require them, you know, to get out, right? They might can work a part-time job like CNN, a CNA work, right? Where they're caring for, you know, probably one of their loved ones, right? They get a CNA certification and then they start caring for a loved one that, you know, they may live with. Right? Because, you know, I've been visiting some of these, you know, 55 and plus, you know, facilities, and I couldn't figure out, you know, what are these young people doing here? You know, and this was early in the morning and even sometimes late at night, you know, and it's just like, well, dang, you know, they made it to where, you know, the 55, you know, the 55-year-old and up community is just who supposed to live there or who applied for the apartment, right? Because I think there was some people who got, you know, the benefits of a rental assistance, and then, you know, because they didn't like the location and the environment, you know, they subleased it to somebody else who paid them, and they went and found some other accommodations, whether it be their car or, you know, traveling. And then, like I said, you know, there are some people who need assistance and care, and so somebody's getting paid, to stay with them, and if they also live there, they might pay little to none of the rent. And that might seem awkward. It might seem awkward, if it's a complete stranger, but, over time, they're no longer a stranger. And if they're a relative, they're not really a stranger. One of the things that was recorded and that a lot of men were angry at was that they were single women with children and single women who were buying homes. They were angry, and of course they said if that's the case, they wouldn't want them, right? But they have made themselves undesirable, period, right? Like I said, there's so much biocontamination that, no woman would want to risk their health, the abuse is so horrible that they would rather be a hobo, live out of shelter, right? When a woman is like fleeing because of abuse, whether it's the screaming and hollering, or the neglect of the financial neglect, or the actual hitting, or the weird restrictions, right? I mean, most men would never live in a home where somebody was to tell them, you can go everywhere except my man cave, my woman cave. They wouldn't put up with that. But they expect the women and children to put up with that. You do not go into the man cave. And then, you're going to get mad because, you have your restrictions, and people are like, well, I guess, we'll have to try to figure out some kind of way to have our own home, because living in your house is impossible for the children. Because even though you may say you only do your drugs and alcohol in the man cave, society is like, y'all are in the same house. And therefore, you doing drugs and alcohol could make the environment an unsafe place for the children. So the woman is like, I got to leave because he does alcohol. He drinks alcohol every night. He smokes cigarettes in the house. I remember, people were trying to tell me, the smoking is harmful to the kids. Don't smoke in the house, right? And I'm like, well, you mean to tell me I got to go out and smoke in my car or outside? And they were like, yeah. I was like, well, damn. Who's going to watch the kids while I'm outside smoking my cigarette? And God forbid if I just happen to chain smoke because I'm pressed with problems. That's what our society, has come to. Our society has come to stating that it's abusive, to smoke cigarettes in your own house, in your own car, on your property, to the other people who don't smoke and who aren't adults. And even though technically they may not even have the funds or the means to take care of themselves, the only alternative they have is to leave. Right? And in our society, yeah, some men love their families too much, to jeopardize their health. They love too much to have to, be without, their family. And it's not many though. It's few. There's few men, that are willing to give up drinking and smoking, in order to keep their family healthy. Because then it becomes another problem, right? They're like, well, I'm not going to give it up. I'm going to go outside of the home and do it, right? So now they got to go someplace else for an hour to who knows how many hours. I mean, for the longest, we used to see people huddled outside smoking. Right? And they haven't really discussed the economic effect that has happened to especially America for the losses that the cigarette companies had to take. We definitely don't see their commercials anymore. Well, I haven't. I think that really tapered off probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Right? But I'm sure they had